So let's start today.
So good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all in Conservation Conversation Meet on the occasion of Wildlife Week. Today we have our guest speaker, Dr. Monica Kaushik, who is a visiting assistant professor in School of Human Ecology, Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has done PhD from Wildlife Institute of India on impact of small scale extractive practices on vegetation and birds communities in Himalayan foothills. If I say in a simple words, she has studied on impact of vegetational disturbance on forest ecosystem using birds as a model system. So her research focus is mainly to study the uh, ecosystem and you and the vegetational disturbance in different landscape, and she has a guild structure. In today's lecture, she is going to emphasize on uh, how the urban green spaces means how the urban areas could contribute to conservation.
Ashutosh, that was really a nice introduction. What I'm presenting today is part of the research that I conducted that was funded by Rufford Foundation. Um, so yes, I'm really excited to be here today on the occasion of Wildlife Week and talking to all of you about bird conservation in urban areas using urban green spaces as tool. Okay, so before I begin, I really want all of you to close your eyes and think of a green place that is closer to your house or you frequently visit. Okay, so take a moment and close your eyes and think about that green place. Okay, I want you to have an image, a clear image of that particular area. Think about the type of trees you see there, grass cover, type of bird and other animal species that you see there. I hope you have all done this small task. And if not, then I'm just giving you a few more moments to do that. Okay. All right. So for few of you, the image would be something similar to this: a large area with very well, which is very well wooded. There are different type of trees. So there are different type of shrubs. Maybe an artificial water body, different type of birds and bees and butterflies all around. But for majority of you, including me, the image of urban green space is something similar to this, which is very sparse tree cover. There are hardly any shrub. Whatever shrub is there is all exotic. Grass cover is missing, at various places. Uh, Although it's not here, but we all have seen that the common bird species such as common mynas, pigeons, crows are the ones that are inhabiting these urban green spaces. So similar to the diverse mental images you all had, urban green spaces are also diverse land uses. In very simple language, urban green space simply refers to a piece of land that is partially or completely covered by a tree, shrub, grass, or any other vegetation feature. Um, and I am very certain that when I asked you to think about an image of an urban green space, it might have actually relaxed you. And that is exactly what happens when we are in urban green spaces or in any other natural area. Urban green spaces provide us the opportunity to recreate and, most importantly, socialize. And both of these qualities, I would say, are becoming much rare in today's fast-paced life. For urban dweller, urban green spaces are also very important common resources as they provide opportunities to make social or political statements. I don't know how many of you have seen this particular TED talk, but I would suggest that you go please watch this one and understand how urban green spaces are not only important from the perspective of birds, but are also important for humans as a society. And when we talk about climate change, that is something that worry all of us. urban green spaces are important to actually mitigate or reduce the effects of urban heat island effects. It simply means that they bring down the temperature of their surrounding. Um, but most importantly, urban green spaces are also areas that provide habitat for some of the vulnerable and threatened species. Some common species also take refuge in urban green spaces. Um, if planned and managed really well, urban green spaces can actually mitigate the effects of urbanization. Um, I mean, I don't think I have to tell the audience that we have today how urbanization influenced the biodiversity. All of you are aware that half of the human population is currently living within cities and towns, and it is expected to increase by 2050. So the future for our generation and the next generation is the one where urbanization is a hard reality, and we have to actually find ways to make spaces for urban biodiversity. So in 2018, as Ashutosh was just mentioning, that I worked in Uttarakhand region for my PhD, and also later on I studied various bird species in different type of land uses across Uttarakhand region. And when I was working there, one thing that concerned me or worried me, and I'm pretty sure people, researchers who have worked there, is the fast-paced land use change in Dehradun and adjoining areas. And therefore, I wrote this small project to understand how urban green spaces could be managed or planned to mitigate the effects of this rapid urbanization in Dehradun. So I told you that I selected Dehradun mainly because I worked there, and that was one area which was facing rapid urbanization. And that was really sudden. I mean, it used to be a very sleepy, lazy town till 2002. In 2002, there was this changed political status. Suddenly, over a night, Uttarakhand was carved out as a state from Uttar Pradesh, and that change political status led to more infrastructure development and more concretization of Dehradun in a less than 2 decades. The population of Dehradun has increased 4 times. These Some of these land use change photographs are actually very scary. If you see that here, the area that has circled, you can see that the urbanization, the red color actually represent the degree of urbanization or human habitation, and you can see that this area in a span of 10 years has completely urbanized. And of course, at the cost of green cover. You can see that in 2000 there was very good green cover in this particular area, which is now gone in less than in a span of 10 years. But when it comes to bird diversity, Uttarakhand especially and Dehradun in particular is very important. Dehradun represent almost 42% of the bird diversity of our country. So we have in Uttarakhand somewhere close to 76 species of birds. And as Ashutosh was mentioning earlier, because it's at the foothill of Himalaya, it receives bird species from Himalaya during winter season. So it's a very important wintering ground for majority of the bird species that are migrating from, or that are taking altitudinal migration from Himalayas, and also for the species that are coming from different countries. So again, I mean, I by this time you all are aware that I worked on bird for my thesis, and that's one of the reason why I selected bird as a model taxon. But any of you who is planning to study any component of biodiversity, you need to select a species which is ecologically significant and is really relatively easy to study in field. And birds have the ability to be seen and also heard by any person who is observing them in the wild. But at the same time, they also are very important ecosystem service providers. So the trees in the urban areas are pollinated by a few of these species. The agricultural areas in the urban ecosystems um, uh, can uh, can be can actually be benefited by the presence of species such as owls and other raptors because of their predatory instinct and controlling the rodent population, and other species such as woodpeckers and barbets providing habitat for other bird species and other animal species. So I asked a very simple question. What are those features at the landscape and local scale that can improve the bird diversity potential of these urban spaces? For example, who here today are have read or have heard of island biogeography concept, they would understand that with increasing size, you would expect an increase in species richness. And that is exactly what I asked. I asked whether increase in size of urban green spaces lead an increase in urban bird diversity. Other than that, from a manager point of view or from a city planner point of view, I wanted to ask what type of matrices around urban green spaces increase the bird species richness and also, provide different habitat for different species. And most importantly, the areas that are now declared or are functioning as urban green spaces, is there a way to make them more bird friendly or or increase their bird potential? So I, through first, we actually selected different urban green spaces all across the Dehradun. This is mainly the southwestern part of Dehradun. And you can see that we selected different urban green spaces in different management regimes. So there were few urban green spaces in institute, in residential complexes, city parks, offices, and plantation. So on paper, Dehradun is expected to become a smart city. So it comes in one of the 100 cities that have been identified by our government to receive a large funding for becoming smart. But there is less focus on increasing the green cover or improving the quality of the existing urban green spaces in that smart city concept. And that was again one of the motivation I wanted to take this study, mainly because the people, the community here are very much still attached to the greenness. I mean, if you go to Dehradun, people who are here from Dehradun, they would vouch for the statement that people have small garden spaces or have a small place where they are growing crops. And sometime, one of the major green space in Dehradun is this tea estate or tea plantation. And in one of the movement, when it was about to be converted to some other land use, especially a mall, the entire city stood up for preventing the conversion of tea plantation to a building. Okay, so that's why I selected these different urban green spaces in different management regimes. Um, so we had, different size and type of urban green spaces in, let's say, residential complexes, institution. Again, Dehradun is one city where we have a large number of educational and research institutions. We also selected city parks. So on paper, there are 64 city parks, but when we went to ground truth, the city parks in Dehradun, we found that some of them are really, really small and we were unable to select. So we selected 4 city parks in the southwestern region of Dehradun. Um, and as I was telling you earlier, that it is not only the properties of the urban green space, but also the surrounding matrix that is important for the biodiversity within any urban green space. So we digitize the urban green spaces within the urban areas, but also the surrounding matrix. So that's how in Google Earth, using the Google Earth feature, we simply digitize different land uses in around the 250-meter buffer of urban green spaces and quantified their area using the ArcGIS. So coming to the effort, we had some 416 variable radius point transect through which we estimated the bird community during breeding and non-breeding season. And I Please stop me if you want me to stop and explain what variable radius point transect means. It simply means that one observer is going to a particular location and recording each and every species that is seen or heard in a given time period. Okay, so this method was used to quantify the bird community during breeding and non-breeding season. So for Dehradun, the breeding season is the summer season from March to almost, I would say, mid-June. And the winter season starts somewhere in the end of September and goes all the way to, went for this particular study, went all the way to December. And this study, I mean, we had two master students who conducted who carried out their dissertation in this particular project. So one student completed the data collection during the summer season, whereas the other collected the data during the breeding season. This was regarding the bird community. We also laid 52 vegetation plot for estimating the tree and shrub community. So we had 10-meter radius plot for the tree richness or tree structure, whereas 5-meter radius plot that were within these 10-meter radius plot to quantify the shrub layer. Okay, coming to the result, what we found out, first of all, we observed or we recorded somewhere close to 140 species of bird. There were some species that were removed from this list, mainly because they were water bird, because in some urban green spaces, we have small water bodies and we have recorded some water birds as well. So we removed that, and only terrestrial birds that were seen in these 18 urban green spaces during breeding and non-breeding season amounts to 141 species. So one thing that I want you to focus on in this particular graph is, first of all, this represent the number of bird species that were seen in different management categories of urban green spaces. One thing that I want you to focus on this particular bar. So city parks, as I told you, were very small and were devoid of good vegetation. There were only non-native trees. So we found out that the bird species was very much decimated in city parks. All other urban green spaces had much higher bird richness during breeding and non-breeding season. The same was true for the density of the breeding bird, for the non-breeding bird density. Although we did not see any pattern in the bird density across urban green spaces in different management in breeding and non-breeding season. This was a very important result when I first got this, that actually substantiated or supported the findings that have been conducted and have been seen in other part of the world. What we found out that with increasing area of urban green spaces, the bird species richness increased linearly. And that was very important. That what it tells us that if we are planning new cities or new urban towns, we need to create, if there is a possibility, we need to make room for larger urban green spaces. So with increasing size of green spaces, the overall bird species richness increased both during breeding and non-breeding season. That was very, very important finding of this particular study. It was not only the overall bird richness that increased. What was very important from this study was the increase in the richness of the most threatened taxa or the guild, bird guild, which is the insectivore guild. So we found out that insectivore guild increased in all different categories. So there are understory insectivore, there are canopy insectivore, sailing insectivore, all the guilds. The richness of all the guilds increased with increasing area of urban green space during breeding and non-breeding season. Some of the species, such as oriental pied hornbill and blue-bearded beater, both are one of these species which is really large sized, and this one is very sensitive species in terms of being very shy. Both species were found only in large urban green spaces. So larger urban green spaces does not really only translate to more number of birds, but it also translates to giving protection or refuge to large or sensitive species. The other important finding of this particular study was that the bird density, breeding density, increased with increasing area, and also with the tree richness in the urban green space. And I have told you how increasing this information on urban green space size can be useful for city planners and people who are making these city plans, but it is also, or are designing cities, but are also important for the manager who are currently managing these urban green spaces. So here the information that we have, that with increasing tree richness, bird density, breeding bird density increased. Okay, so that means that if we have different type of trees in urban green spaces that provide nesting resources, diverse nesting resources to different type of species, and thereby increases the breeding bird density. This was another important finding of the study, which was how does matrix composition, because so far I have just told you about how increasing size of urban green space and the tree richness increases the bird species richness and density. But what is also important is what is the role of the matrix or the land uses in the surrounding areas of the urban green spaces. What I found out that when I conducted this simple analysis of an MDS, I found out that majority of the city park or the small urban green spaces are characterized by very high percentage of built up. Okay, so what these city parks were, mainly the small parks that you see at the junction of two residential complexes. So these city parks were very small, were surrounded by large percentage of built up, whereas the red dots represent the large urban green spaces, and you can see that they are characterized by higher tree richness, large size of course, and the surrounding areas had higher percentage of agricultural areas. Whereas the medium-sized parks were represented by the one that have either a matrix of barren areas as well as the water bodies. And you can see some of the species that signify these different urban green spaces were. So, for example, for small city park, the bird community or the bird composition consisted of very common species such as common myna, yeah, feral pigeons, crows. Whereas for medium-sized park, which had surrounding matrix of barren and water, were represented by these species which require or which feed on the aerial insects. Okay, so we had green bee-eater, swallows, prinias that were occupying these medium-sized park. But the large park, as I told you earlier also, were the one represented by the community that had large size species foraging on ground such as red jungle fowl, species that nest in cavities such as lineated barbet and hornbills. The few particular areas which were surrounded by agriculture also had higher representation from species such as black drongos and Asian quail, which actually do really well in edge habitat. So this was what we found out, that not only the size of the urban green space and the tree species richness within them, but the surrounding matrix also influences the bird community. I'm now taking you to this small study that we conducted over 3-4 months. We basically were interested to find out how the tree species that are planted within urban green spaces can influence the bird community. So what we did, we compared the bird visitation rate on native and non-native tree. We selected a jamun tree, which is a native tree, to Uttarakhand, and we selected palm tree. And I'm pretty sure that most of you will agree with me that you see a lot of palm trees in urban areas, especially in garden, because they are very easy to plant, and also they do not require much management compared to the native tree, which are mostly deciduous, and they shed leaves during a particular season. So what we did, we compared the birds that come to these two trees, and we wanted to see what they are doing with the fruit. Are they really eating, or they are taking the resources, or it doesn't really matter to the bird community. So we selected a tree species, we estimated their crop. It simply means we quantified how many fruits are there on these two different trees. We had 5 tree in native category and 5 tree individuals in the non-native category. We did very simple behavioral observations using scan and focal sampling techniques. And we also estimated the crop size of neighborhood trees, mainly to negate any bias because of the neighboring trees that might attract more birds. What we found out was very something that we expected, that there were more number of trees uh, on the native tree. So we found some 26 species on a jamun tree, of which 15 were common to palm. So we found 20 species on palm and 26 species on jamun. There was a much overlap in terms of bird species that comes to both these trees. So there were 15 bird species that were common to jamun and palm, but there were few species that were very particular to jamun and never were observed on palm. So there were 11 species, which include Asian quail, golden oriole, Brahmani starling, plum-headed parakeet, that were never seen on. These are only 4 species that I'm telling you, but they were never seen on palm. Whereas there were 2 species that were seen only on palm and not on jamun, which includes Baya weaver. And we can imagine that Baya is a species that require that type of, I would say, tree architecture to make nest. And choosing this particular tree to make nest was very obvious. And pied cuckoo, again a species that comes here during summer, and is a it's a species that actually lay egg in another bird nest. What we found out in terms of total number of bird that were visiting per hour, jamun and palm, we found that lot of species were um, found every hour on jamun compared to palm. So majority of our bird species were seen on jamun or were using jamun more frequently than palm. When it comes to showing different behavior, we found out that there was not much difference when it comes to majority of the behavior of the bird species that were seen on both the trees. But you look at this particular bar, which represent the feeding behavior, mainly feeding on the fruits of these two fruits, and we found out that there was much more feeding in terms of time spent by a bird on jamun compared to the palm fruits. And this work, I would like to mention that this was part of a student's internship work. Her name is Ansha Sehgal. I just wanted to make it clear it's not something that I did independently. She collected the data. So now coming to discussion, I mean, we saw this graph where I told you that city parks do not support many species compared to other urban green spaces, and why is that case? Small size of city park is one of the reasons, but other reasons of having less number of species, and something this is, I mean, have been seen in other studies, is the lack of understory shrub cover. Okay, so again, I mean, this is one vegetation layer that attract a lot of bird species and provide nesting and food resources for a majority of birds. That is largely missing in city parks. They are small sizes, other reason for not having too many species. But an important aspect that need to be investigated further research is the presence of invasive predators such as dogs and cats. Majority of these small city parks, as I told you earlier, were surrounded by human habitation where they get almost continuous supply of food, and that gives them time to go and forage in urban green spaces as well. So there is a possibility that these invasive predators are feeding on the birds or are causing disturbance to the birds that are there in these small city parks, and that could be the reason that we didn't see many species in small city parks. Now coming to why does species richness increase with increased urban green space size? And as I told you earlier, one reason which has been seen in island biogeography also is that when you increase the size of any habitat or any landscape, actually, there is a possibility of having different type of habitat. So a large urban green space could have a forest, a fallow land, maybe a small garden, playground, and that's why providing a different mishmash of habitat, allowing more species to pack in larger green spaces. The other reason why larger urban green spaces had more number of species is also because large green spaces in especially in Dehradun, if I say, were the one that are very old. So they have large trees and that provide resources, nesting and food resources to some of the large species. Again, I mean, coming back to the size and why bird species richness have increased. There is also a possibility that the mishmash of different habitat provides safe foraging and nesting refuge to some of the bird species, despite of having presence of invasive predators such as dogs and cats. So larger green spaces, because of this heterogeneity of different habitat, when a predator is coming, a bird can actually move from an exposed area to another habitat patch and can seek refuge. So that could lead to increase in bird species richness in larger areas. Why does bird species richness increase with increasing tree species richness? I think that's very obvious. Different trees provide different food and nesting resources to the bird. But what is not very obvious or evident is that different trees, different type of trees also lead to increasing in habitat heterogeneity, especially the vertical heterogeneity, which simply means that when you are looking from the ground and trying to see the sky, you will probably see different type of branches and leaves interacting with each other, and that type of habitat is really useful for majority of bird species, okay, because it allows them to not compete with each other but coexist in a given area. And that's very important finding from the point of view of a park manager, especially the city parks or the campuses and educational or research institution, because they can choose tree species which increases habitat heterogeneity. And as we saw previously, that palm, which have canopy only at the very top and doesn't have any intervening branches or leaves, doesn't really add to the habitat structure or heterogeneity. I'm coming now to conclusion. Urban green spaces, when city planners or the designers are thinking of designing a city, especially now because we know that the large proportion of urbanization or is going to be in the developing countries such as India and Brazil. So when we are thinking of making these new cities and towns, we need to conceptualize that at a large regional scale. We need to think of a matrix of different urban green spaces that are more or less connected to each other to allow species migrate from one region to other, especially from, I would say, from source habitat to other habitat. Immediate action is required to minimize the disturbance. I mean, a majority of the green spaces, apart from having populations of, I would say, invasive predator, are also the one where people are dumping their waste. And that's really scary, mainly because it attracts more invasive predator, and it also provide refuge for some of the diseases to be spread from the domestic areas to the wilder habitats. So it's very important to minimize or actually stop disturbance in any urban green space. And also when designing, during the designing state, the city planner need to think about the matrix surrounding these urban green spaces. If they can find places in areas which have agriculture or open areas that can provide more different type of species to these urban green spaces, then it is very, very beneficial for the entire region. Um, now, I would like to also tell you that the next step for us, for me in particular, is to find out how functional diversity, because taxonomic diversity simply means how many types of species are there. But now I would like to look at the functional diversity and the urban green space size and landscape feature that influence. When I say functional diversity, I simply mean how many types of functional groups are there in different urban green spaces, and do they also show the similar behavior that the taxonomic diversity show, which simply means whether I see increase in functions of birds with increasing size or with increasing tree diversity. And why is that important? Mainly because in urban ecosystem, if you want services to be continued and more, them to be self-sustaining, then we want more functional groups, including seed disperser, pollinator, predatory controller. There could be also ecosystem engineers, scavengers. So we need all these different groups, not only the numbers to increase, but variety of functions that we receive from these bird species. I also want to expand my work, this particular work, to other city to see whether we see similar pattern with the landscape and local scale feature in terms of bird community, because we know that the bird community in urban green spaces is representation of the bird species richness at the regional scale. So I want to also test these findings in other areas. And also keep continuing work in this particular area, because now we have very good baseline data. Now we are also collaborating. I'm collaborating with someone who is working on the bees in this particular landscape, and trying to find out if the bees are responding or behaving in a similar way as the bird do. Because sometimes what happens that you take a particular taxa as an indicator species and try to say that other species are also showing the similar effect. But I want to validate that and see whether other taxa also show similar response to changing size and tree species richness, and what is more beneficial for them in the urban green spaces. What feature need to be conserved so that we have not only higher bird species richness, but also richness or diversity of other taxa. With that, I would like to acknowledge all these people who have helped in various stages. First of all, I would like to thank Rafford Foundation for funding this research, Wildlife Institute of India for providing logistic and other support, and Ambedkar University, where I'm currently working, and the students who are still continuing work through my engagement with this particular university. I would like to thank Samakshi Tiwari, who was the first student and did most of the work in terms of selecting the site, digitizing area. Manisha later on collected data during the breeding season. Ansha collected data on native and non-native plants. But most importantly, I would like to thank a large number of volunteers who have helped these three people in collecting data. I mean, there were people who were driving them down, who were looking out for accommodation for these students in Dehradun. So I would like to thank everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Puneet Pandey and Dr. Ashutosh Singh, for providing me this opportunity to talk to a larger audience and share my findings. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Monica. It was really a fantastic lecture, that how you have correlated the urban landscape. Sorry. No.
Hello, Dr. Monica. I am audible.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I am sorry. It was really a fantastic lecture that you have correlated the urban landscape, means how the population is increasing, our lands are continuously converted into the concrete jungles, and you have used the bird as a model group. And it is well known fact that the birds are not only associated with humans since long time, as we know the examples of Garun, that why Garun and the if we see in the Buddhist culture, then in a life of a cycle they have a place in the center of the life of a cycle. So it is very important to know that how the, and it is also well known fact that if any ecosystem is disturbed, the first animal which moves away from that place are the birds. So uh, as I would like to just point and ask you a question, that you have worked on a community level of birds in different landscapes, in different means in villages and even in cities. So do you think that what the manager should focus on, whether the plantation is enough to increase the diversity of birds in the urban landscapes, or would you like to suggest that we can improve the heterogeneity in the urban landscape in a better way? Means what would you like to suggest?
Thanks, Ashutosh, for this question. Yeah, I mean, one of the findings that we had, and also, I mean, the borrowing from the previous work that have been conducted in different landscape, what is shown is that if you have native tree species mainly, that's one thing that can increase the bird diversity substantially, mainly because it not only provide them different type of fruits and insects and platform to make nests, but also by increasing the vertical heterogeneity. That being said, I was also expecting the shrub species richness to have a very strong influence on the bird community, just because, I mean, the how the trees are behaving for some of the large canopy dwelling trees, I would imagine the same to be paralleled or mirrored in the understory. Um, but I did not see that. One of the main reason is in most of these city parks and urban green spaces, there is a very, I would say, harsh management of understory. You all might have seen shrubs being removed from the ground, mainly in fear of reptiles or other, I would say, pests that can take refuge. Um, but that's very very important aspect of vegetation that need to be considered when anyone is thinking of I would say rewilding or restoring a particular urban green space or a degraded area. So not only looking at trees, native trees, but also including shrub in the restoration plan. I hope that answer your question, Ashutosh.
Yeah, exactly. I have two questions from the audience, but before
Okay.
proceeding to that, I just wish to know. So, what are the means? Just like you are working in the urban landscapes, right? So, what are your main focus in the futures? That how you can means what you are going to contribute to increase the, means it's not a single person task. I know that, but means what you would like to suggest to our audience, that how they can increase the diversity, means to our environmental managers, our citizens, because nowadays citizen science is also an important part of our science. So what you would like to suggest to our environmental managers and the normal students, just like who are not the part of the scientific community, but they want to contribute to the uh, science? So what you would like to say?
That's a very good question, Ashutosh, mainly because currently due to pandemic we all are at home and we feel very depressed that we cannot go to forest or to other natural areas, especially in rural areas. But I would say that it is very important to document document biodiversity around you, and especially the parks, even if it is a small park, even if it has common bird, these common birds are also playing very significant role in ecosystem functioning. And one important tool, especially people who are interested in birds or studying birds, for them to record a bird on this very simple and very, I would say, user-friendly tool, eBird. And that's an app you all can actually download on your phone. It's very easy to use. There are many tutorials on the eBird website also to how to use it and record your bird observation. It's important for us, and also it gives a sense of joy that, oh, I have seen this species or that species. I mean, here, even in East Delhi, where I'm living, there are not many birds, but once in a while I see a golden oriole or a black-headed ibis, and that actually cheers me up. So the people, I mean, the student who are still, I mean, I would say at home and are looking for any type of work or are interested in wildlife, they should simply start using these apps. Season Watch is other app that student can use. That being said, now coming to the manager, what is important for them is also, I mean, make use of the information that is there. So how are they selecting species, plant species to plant in these urban green spaces is probably something that don't really think about, but that has a very important role for the bird, for the any component of biodiversity, be it bird or reptile or any other taxa. So they need to select or choose species based on science, but not only on like which is easier to manage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for your answer. And now the Sabuj has complimented you that lovely presentation, Dr. Monica. And he has a question that I am curious, what kind of a response you have received from people when you went out to collect your data in different land use type? Are people aware about importance about urban green spaces? And does this awareness varies with their academic socioeconomic background? He's from DBT Welcome Trust Alliance.
Thank you, Shobuj. That's a very nice question. I was really concerned because, I mean, if you have seen the acknowledgement slide, you will realize that majority of the students who worked in this project, I don't know, for some weird reason, were all girls. And I was really scared for their safety. But surprisingly, fortunately, we never had any bad, I would say, experience so far. People were, I would, again, I mean, that's a very important thing that you have pointed out, that their responses vary according to their socioeconomic background and education. And that need to be, again, I mean, I think it's a project in itself. One can study how the knowledge and also their response to urban green space varies based on their socioeconomic background. I mean, we are all aware that some of the posh areas in all the cities are green mainly because people around them are one which are, I mean, either have higher education or are very affluent, so they can I would say afford that biodiversity in their background. I don't know how many of the poorer people can do that. So yeah, that need to be studied further, Shubhaj.
I hope Sabuj must be satisfied with the answer. Uh, 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 and Sabuj, if you want, then you can means you can interact. You can just unmute yourself and you can interact with Dr. Monica directly. Meanwhile, Sabuj is not means it's not available. So we have another question from Keshav Gupta. He also said, "Thank you, ma'am, for your time. I want to just ask that the tree planted after the formation of new infrastructure, that is like highway, etc., are they planned? Also, natural plantation can't be same. So how does it affect, and what is the extent?"
Thanks, Keshav. I am not sure what you mean by new. Okay, so you mean the plants or the vegetation plantation that is around the highways. Um, Again, I mean, unfortunately, the selection is with different bodies. I mean, in Delhi, we know that NDMC is one, Delhi Development Authority is another institution, MCD is other institution. One of the student in Delhi, when she went out to find out how they select plants for plantation, in, let's say, parks or near the highway, we found out that it's again not based on science. There are documents, especially for Delhi. I can say that there are trees that have been suggested, especially when the city was planned in, I would say, in British or actually early independent era. During that time, there were trees that were identified by the city planners, but now what we see is majority of the trees that are planted in Delhi near highways and other areas are all non-native. And again, I mean, some of them require a large amount of water to grow really well, causing much more stress to the water table, to already water stressed Delhi. So answer so far is no. I mean, no, there is no science going behind in how you are selecting trees and other plantations near all these infrastructure. Does that answer your question, Keshav?
Keshav, if you like it, then you can interact directly. No.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I think, yeah, exactly. Nowadays, we are seeing a lot of the jamun trees and some fig trees around the road constructions. So could be these are the based on the recommendation and the management action plans, and the means maybe they have seen several times how these trees are attracting the different bird species, even because not only the bird species, even some of the fruit eating animals also, even the insects also are totally based on these trees. So I think the plantation of these trees are means automatically increasing the diversity around the trees and the landscape. So it's a good idea to improve the biodiversity in an ecosystem using such kind of a plants. So Monica, it's really fantastic to have you in our meeting. So it's really nice talk. So I would like to thank you on behalf of our team and Protect India Foundation. So yeah, I will welcome our Dr. Puneet Pandey to say words of thanks to you.
No, before the words of the thanks, it's just my curiosity because I'm not a person of a ecology background. But when you look into the bird diversity and the urban landscapes, so did you find any skewed population status of these birds? More of a vermin species like manna and other species? Because nowadays, if you look into the urban planning, there is a lot more concern is there about the kind of an economic damage these vermin species are doing nowadays. So do you have
Yeah.
some data available?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Dr. Pandey, mainly because, I mean, mm, we all know that urbanization and other stresses, they have different filters. I mean, there are different traits that are selected. So if a species has to perform really well in urban area, it has to pass through various filter. And so, I mean, like, it's not rocket science and it's not something unique to Dehradun, but we also found that species such as common myna, pigeons, crows, these are the species which actually performs well in different type of habitat, have the higher, I would say, highest densities. So there were only 10 species. So we have recorded 109 species in winter and 121 species during summer, breeding and non-breeding season. What we found out that out of all these more than 100 species, the majority of the abundance were contributed by top 10 or top 6 species. That what you were saying, that there was a skewed distribution in terms of abundances of different species. So majority of the species are represented by very few individuals, whereas large habitat are occupied by, or majority of the habitat are occupied by these common species which are occurring in very high densities in all urban green spaces.
Yeah.
So yes, that's something
In
that is
continuation
very
of this
concerning.
question, I just want to ask, maybe you can give us some idea. Is there any difference in the abundance of the migratory birds in past 10 years or 20 years since you have been talking about?
Okay, for that I think I need to do some analysis. But I mean, what I can say, at least in terms of that's, I mean, I really don't want to make any false statement here, but in terms of habitat use, I can say that I mean, I was expecting whether I mean, I was expecting that migratory bird will probably use more disturbed areas, because these are the species that are coming during winter, and resident species have already occupied the niches, so they might be in I would say suboptimal habitat. But that was not the case. What I found out, that wherever the resident birds were, migratory were also using those birds as the cue. So the richness of migratory bird community increased with the increasing same responses as the resident bird were showing. But their abundances and the trend, I'm sorry, I haven't looked into it, but it's a very good it's a very good thing to actually check. That's very important point that you have mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dr. Puneet, you should conclude the session.
It was a really nice session. And basically, it was a reunion of Wildlife Institute people. I must say. So, and
Yeah.
fortunately, we also have Dr. Sabuj also in in the panel asking the question. Once a question was popped up, I just realized, okay, he was also there, and fortunately, you satisfied him also with your answer. So it was a really informative session. I'll suggest all the participants also in future, if you want to be in touch with Dr. Monica, we'll share the link of this video as well as the contact details of Dr. Monica with you people. You can keep in touch with us, and please join us tomorrow's webinar also, which will be on the wildlife laws and policies. So this pandemic time, we are celebrating this. The theme of this webinar series is what? Conservation conversations. So let's talk about it. We cannot do anything in this pandemic time. At least we can talk, build some consensus, plan the things so that when the things get normalized, we can directly go and execute it. So with all these words, I again thank you, Dr. Monica, just agreeing to our schedule in just a short span of time. Thanks a lot. We'll
Thank
hope
you so
to
much.
have you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ashutosh, and thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. I mean, I'm really happy to be talking not to my class for a change, and talking to other researcher and different participants. So thank you so much for providing me this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay, thanks to all participants also for joining us. Please join us tomorrow also at 5 p.m. Thank you.
4 p.m. I think.
Oh, yeah, it's 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
We'll be sharing a link of the tomorrow's webinar shortly. So you can just join using that Zoom link, connect to us at 4 p.m. Indian time. Thanks a lot.